I just want to take time real quick to thank you for joining me in 1 Timothy 2 verses 13 and 14. Now before I get started, I know that Paul is, speaking to the women who are preaching, saying that what he's saying is what Paul has seen is women just, kind of teaching kind of what they want to teach. Basically making scripture fit to their needs and things like that. And so he's reminding them that, whoa, you need to actually sit back and learn, and in that time it would have been only the women, in today's time it would have been both men and women who are eager to teach and would not have a very good understanding of what the word is saying. And, also what Paul is speaking to, like I mentioned earlier, how he was speaking to the women who were making the scriptures, kind of fit their needs. He would kind of say the same thing to anybody today that would be trying to make scripture fit their needs. And so yes, I understand that that's like the main point of what Paul is saying, but today I just want to focus on 13 and 14. What is Paul saying in those two verses? Just those two verses. What would Paul be saying to men and women? Like if he was, picture Paul preaching to husbands and wives inside the church, what would Paul see from husbands and wives inside the church? And what would he be saying? What would one of the things, the key things that he would be trying to tell husbands and wives inside the church based on what he would be seeing? And he would be seeing a lot of finger pointing. I believe there's a lot of finger pointing in marriages today. Not just finger pointing, but also there's a lot of marriages, both male and female, husband and wife, trying to set the standards. This is what I have seen through my observation, is I have seen some men trying to set the standards for their wives. But on the flip side, through my observation, I've also seen many women trying to set the standards for their husband. And God is the one that sets those standards. So, and far and large, how many women, how many wives and single ladies have set the standards for man, or set the standards for their husband? Because it's not that men don't have high standards. It's not that God hasn't set high standards for man, or higher standards for man than woman. Because God has set higher standards for man than woman. Why? Because man is the head of the household. But I've seen many single women, married women. I've seen many pastors in a church. I've seen many churches, instead of allowing God to set the standards for men, they're the ones setting the standards. And so, when I read these two scriptures from 1 Timothy 2:13 and 14, I think to myself, if Paul was alive today and he was speaking to the churches, he was speaking to the women, the married women and the single women inside the churches, and maybe even some of the single men and married men, he would say, stop trying to set the standards for your spouse. Allow God to set the standards. More so, remember, you ladies, you married women, you single women that want your man to have high standards. Remember that it was you, going back to the garden, it was actually woman that was tempted. It was woman that fell. It was woman that ate that took the first bite. It was woman that was deceived. And so, I can see where this part, these two verses, would apply in today's time. Now, yes, there are some men that this would be for. There's men out there that need to hear this just as much as the women do. But women need to hear this more so. Why? Because it seems like to me there's a lot of women that have an ideal version, this ideal version of a husband is for their husband to be Superman. Hold it right there. Superman does not exist, so why are you trying to make your husband be like Superman? Superman does not exist, so let's just leave it at that. There's no need to try to get your husband to be Superman. And so, yes, God has high standards for your husband. If you are married, He has, if you're a woman that's married to a man, your husband, yes, He has high standards for him. But it's not for you to set those standards. It's not for you to set those standards. It's for God to set those standards for your husband. Likewise, men that are single, men that are married, it's not for you to set the standards for your wife. Let God set the standards for your wife. But again, more so for the women. More so for the women. Why? Because not only do a lot of women do this, even the church does it, and even past a church, they have been setting the standards for men. How many churches have said, well, men they have higher standards, they have this, they have that, and how many times do we lift up, like, I don't really hear a whole lot of pastors or churches, or I just don't hear us lifting up men. I hear us more, complaining that men are not living up to the standards. I hear a lot more complaining that men aren't living up to the standards than people, churches, pastors, and wives encouraging their husbands. And so that's why I say, if Paul was speaking to the church, to husbands and wives, to marriages, he would say this. He would say exactly what I'm saying. As for you wives out there, stop complaining that your man is not living up to God's standards. Allow God to be the one to decide whether or not your husband is living up to the standards that God has for him. Don't set those standards for God. Allow God to set those standards. Let me read 13 and 14. For God made Adam first. And that's a good point. For God made Adam first, and afterward he made Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived by Satan. The woman was deceived, and sin was the result. So, just take those two verses. Don't take the verses, because I know the verses before that and the verses after that, but we're not doing that here today. We're only focusing on those two verses. And so just taking those two verses, I know that that's what, if Paul could see the marriages today, he would see a lot of women in a lot of churches, he would see a lot of wives and a lot of single women and a lot of churches today trying to set the standards for men instead of allowing God to set those standards. Because, look, I'm not saying that God doesn't have higher standards for man. God does have higher standards for man, because man is supposed to be the head of the household. But look, in today's world, it's almost like God is not the one setting those standards. It's women are the ones setting those standards for men. It's churches that are setting those standards for men and not God. It's the pastor of a church setting those standards for men and not God. See, we are living in a world where everybody but God is setting the standard for men. And we need to let go. Especially women. You women need to remember. And I'm not trying to finger point. I'm just simply trying to say, take a deep breath. In and out. And remember that it is the woman who was deceived. Therefore, just take a deep breath in and out. Stop trying to set the standards for men and allow God to set the standards for man, and see what happens.